join me in a moment of prayer. Holy Spirit, fill this place with your presence. Be with me as I speak, and with your people so they hear your word. Amen. So in our gospel reading today, we have the people looking at the temple in Jerusalem and going, wow, look at those big stones. Look at how beautiful the jewels are. Look at how wonderful all the furnishings are. They were impressed with the building. And I would say rightly so. One time I looked up what the size of some of those stones were, and some of those stones were 38 feet by 10 feet. That would barely fit up here in this chancel area. 38, I measured it, so I know. 38 feet by 10. 10 feet comes from back there to about here, so this way, but width-wise, 38 feet. Can you imagine standing in front of one of those stones? The walls of the building were 65 feet thick. I mean, we got cinder block walls that are fairly thick. Can you imagine a 65-foot thick wall? That building wasn't going anywhere. That's the way it was designed, to be forever. And it was laden with gold and jewels of all kinds that glistened in the sunlight. You needed sunglasses anywhere around it when the sun was shining. And it was full of all kinds of beautiful furnishings. The people were duly impressed. The building itself took up 37 acres. For perspective, all of our property that we have here is 9. The building took up 4 times the size of our property. This place is massive and impressive, even more impressive than the Football Hall of Fame. And the people are looking at that and going, isn't this great? And Jesus goes, yeah, not so much. As a matter of fact, it's all going to be destroyed one day. Imagine what that felt like, to be told that. Many or some of you know that I just got back. I was in Denver, Colorado for Anchor Church training. And one of the pastors there is a pastor of a church that, I forget now, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, burnt to the ground. His church burnt to the ground. They rebuilt it different than it was, thankfully, because it was a building that had been added on to over the years, over the decades, and it was a tangled mess of all kinds of stuff. But they were able to rebuild it. The temple was destroyed, or Jesus said it would be destroyed. And what was the thing the people asked? When? What's going to be a sign to us that this huge, magnificent building is going to be destroyed? Isn't that amazing? They believed Jesus. A building whose walls are 65 feet thick, sitting on 37 acres of property. They believed Jesus when he said it's going to be destroyed. That is, to me, one of the most amazing things about our story. They believed him. To look at the building and go, oh, wow, okay, when's this going to happen? We skate over the fact that they actually believed him that it would happen. And we all know the rest of the story. Some 30 years later, 40 years later, it actually was destroyed. But the people of the time would think this was an indestructible building. But they believed Jesus. So much so that the only thing they could think to ask was, how are we going to know when it's going to happen? And then Jesus tells them, you're going to see floods and tornadoes and fires. You're going to see wars. You're going to see all kinds of desolation happening. But that's not exactly when it's going to be destroyed. Something else has to happen first. But yet today, even, I hear from, well, some of you, I hear from everywhere I go, whenever we have these hurricanes and floods and tornadoes and forest fires that consume hundreds of thousands of acres and buildings and stuff, I hear people saying the end must be near. Because that's what Jesus said. The end must be coming soon. Because I see all this destruction happening. Climate change is causing all kinds of things that must be a sign the end is coming. And I go, well, wait a minute. Jesus said something else would come first. I invite you to look at verse 12. Jesus said, yes, all these terrible, rotten things are going to happen, and that's going to be a sign, but, verse 12 starts, but, the verbal eraser, but before all that occurs, they're going to arrest you and persecute you and kill you. Is that going on? How many of you lately have been arrested for Jesus' sake? Yeah. None of you? Do you know anybody who's been arrested for Jesus' sake? Because they were saying so much about this loving God. They were saying so much about this God who just wants everybody to be well and caring for each other. They're so busy spreading the good news that they get arrested. Any of you know anybody like that? Not so much, right? Well, then, these fires and earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes, they're just fires and earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes. It's not a sign of the end of times because, Jesus' own words, but first, you're going to be arrested and persecuted and tried and killed. That's your sign that the end is coming, that Jesus will return again. Well, that's good, Pastor. Then I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing and not spreading the good news of Jesus Christ because I don't want the end to come, so I'm not going to hasten it by getting arrested for Jesus' sake. Good. Phew. My not doing anything is the way to go. Not so much. Because let's go back to what Jesus said about the temple being destroyed. Why was the temple going to be destroyed? Because that became their God. The temple became what was important in their life. The temple was the center of what they did, was the center of their pride, was what they lived for, was going to temple. You see, the people forgot to do God's work. And so God said, since you're so wrapped up in this building and not busy doing my work, I'm just going to destroy the building to help you focus on the right thing. I didn't have the guts to ask that pastor colleague of mine of what his congregation was doing prior to the fire. Were they busy and wrapped up in their building? Was their church building, the center of their lives, and they were so proud of it, they told everybody what a wonderful facility this was? They came on Sunday and went home Sunday after an hour, and nothing changed in their lives. Is that what was going on? Is that why his church burned? That's why the temple was destroyed. And I think we have to remember that. The whole reason the temple was destroyed is because the people's focus was wrong. It was on their building. In this day and age, in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, we have many congregations that are dwindling away to nothing. We have 150 congregations in the Northeastern Ohio Synod. 50 of those congregations do not have a pastor. 50, 1/3 of the ELCA churches in the Northeastern Ohio Synod do not have a pastor. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. All of them have to do with the people in the church. I've often asked you, 208 years you've been in existence. How many pastors have you had in those 208 years? We'd have to do some research to find out, wouldn't we? In those 208 years, how many pastors did you make? A whole lot less than you had. Where's the problem in the shortage of pastors? People sitting in the pew. I was in a church that was 175 years old, I think it was. I was pastor of that church. I forgot what number pastor I was. Guess how many pastors they made in their 175 years? Not a one. Where's the problem? We're too focused on the wrong stuff. When churches get down to the place where only 25 or 30 people are worshiping, they tend to focus inward. How can we keep our building going? I've talked with many of the congregations around here that are struggling, and their whole thing is, if we could only get a pastor, we'd be fine. And I asked them what they're doing. And their response is waiting for a pastor. Look at this great building. Isn't this wonderful? Jesus says, no, you've forgotten what your purpose is. Purpose is to love and serve and to spread the good news. We do really good at that, which is why we're not one of those struggling congregations. We recognize our purpose is not this grand building. I really think that if this place burned down, you'd all continue to come here. Now, we wouldn't be worshiping outside because most of you are wimps and think it's too cold out there. But we'd find somewhere we could worship and it would be warm during these chilly months. Because you recognize that coming here is not the end, it's the beginning. Coming here is what builds you up so you can go out there and do God's work. And that's why you are considered a vital congregation in the Northeastern Ohio Synod. Because you recognize that it's what goes on out there that's important. That I was invited to go to Anchor Church training where I was this past week. We're not impressed with our building, although it is a nice building. If it were to be destroyed tomorrow, it would be fine. We'd find a way to rebuild or move somewhere else or do something else. We would continue to do the work of God in the meantime. Just like during COVID, when most churches were literally shut down, you were bemoaning the fact of how can we get stuff done? How can we continue serving the community when we can't meet? What can we do differently so we can keep making a difference to the community? That was your challenge. You weren't impressed with the stone. You're impressed with the work you have to do. And that's a good thing. But Jesus says, before I return, before the end of the world, before it all blows up, you're going to be arrested, persecuted, sharing my name and my love out there. I leave you with two questions to consider. Feel free to write them down. Why, in God's name, does Zion Lutheran Church exist? God's name does this congregation exist? If you say, so I can come to church on Sunday morning, I'd say to that's a nice start. Why, in God's name, do we exist? The second question is this. What is God calling you to do for Jesus' sake? Not what is God calling the person sitting in front of you or the person sitting beside you or the person on the other side of the aisle. What is God calling you to do for Jesus' sake? Not for your sake, not for the sake of this building. Jesus. Those are the things Christ was trying to get his people to see. And it's difficult to see that when you're surrounded by beauty, which we are. Let's step back and think about those two questions. Why in God's name do we exist? And what is Jesus calling you to do for his sake? When we can answer those questions, or when we have some idea about those questions, we will continue to flourish. We'll continue to attract people to this loving God. We will continue to show the love of God to others, and we'll continue to matter the community around us. Why in God's name do we exist? What is God calling you to do